Hello peoples and welcome to a very special episode of Esoterica Cinema. My name is Ryan Seybold. Let's take a look at the history and context of Norman Jewison's In the Heat of the Night. This film is a police procedural set in rural Mississippi in the mid-1960s. The local police come across the dead body of a wealthy factory owner laying on the street. Almost immediately, they find at the train station a one Virgil Tibbs, a black man whose alibi includes visiting family and being on his way home to Philadelphia. Virgil is quickly arrested and charged with the murder, seemingly more so for the crime of being an unrecognized black man in the wrong place at the wrong time, i.e. Mississippi in 1967, until it is discovered that he is in fact a homicide detective. With Detective Tibbs just trying to get home, his own police chief insists he stay to lend his expertise to help. So, against all cultural divides, mostly racism, this group has to learn to work together to solve this case. The film was directed by Norman Jewison and stars Rod Steiger as the local police chief Bill Gillespie, Sidney Poitier as Detective Virgil Tibbs, and co-stars the always recognizable Warren Oates as the policeman Sam Wood, who found the body and helps along the way. The film was made on a budget of $2 million and brought in a box office of $24 million. It also brought in a heap and helping of awards, including Oscars for Best Picture, Best Actor for Rod Steiger, and Best Editing for one Hal Ashby, who would not strike out on his own as a director until 1970 when he makes The Landlord. If you're thinking Hal Ashby, how do I know that name? Well, he went on to direct films like Harold and Maude and The Last Detail that we've covered on this show. But he cut his teeth as Jewison's editor. I'll also bring attention to the score by one Quincy Jones, including the title track performed by Ray Charles. Wall-to-wall heavy hitters here. It's a solid little police drama, but what's so important or special about this film? The answer to that lies mostly in the set and setting of it all. So let's talk about what was going on in America in the mid-1960s. In 1964, President Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act, which abolished segregation and outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Specifically in the South, where this movie takes place, traditions known as Jim Crow laws deemed people of color of such little value that it was an absolute offense to exist on an equal plane with them in any way. At every opportunity, white people were expected culturally to remind them of their place in society. The black population were not allowed to coexist with white people, and signs stating whites only were commonplace in businesses everywhere. Moving past that, civil rights leader Malcolm X was killed in 1965. In 1967, with the case of Loving versus Virginia, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of federally legalizing interracial marriage. So prior to the year this movie came out, it was deemed illegal for a person considered white to be married to any person deemed to be a person of color. I should mention here that Poitier himself was married to a white woman, Joanna Shimkus, for 46 years. In 1968, the year after this film was released, Martin Luther King was assassinated, along with Robert Kennedy, who was a known proponent of civil rights and who was running for president at the time. Also in 1968, President Johnson signed into law the Fair Housing Act, which prohibited discrimination in the sale, rental, or finance of housing. At this time, a large majority of the rural South was none too pleased by any of these civil rights laws and a push towards equality, and saying they were slow to respect them would be an understatement. It was a huge cultural divide in America, and with everybody recently getting a television in their home at the time, the evening news was loaded with visuals showcasing police brutality, riots, and societal resistance, forcing the country to hold a mirror up and take a good long look at what was happening around them. At this point, you may be thinking, there were black people in movies before this, what's the big deal? You're right, there were. In fact, Sidney Poitier was the first African American to win Best Actor for his role in Lilies of the Field in 1963. By 1967, he was one of the largest box office draws you could hire. But roles for people of color were always careful to walk the cultural line so as not to tip the scales. But this movie put Detective Virgil Tibbs in not only as an equal, but actually as a superior. He outsmarted Chief Gillespie at every turn and demanded respect even though it put his life in danger. The most notable scene in the film to explore this has Detective Tibbs attempting to present evidence to Chief Gillespie, and the chief downplaying his position by repeatedly calling him Virgil.
Pretty sure of yourself, ain't you, Virgil? Virgil, that's a funny name for a nigger boy that comes from Philadelphia. What do they call you up there?
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
Mr. Tibbs! Well, Mr. Wood, take Mr. Tibbs, take him down to the depot, and I mean boy like now.
They call me Mr. Tibbs. In other words, you could question me, you could doubt me, but you will not disrespect me. In 1967, Detective Virgil Tibbs could be denied housing simply due to the color of his skin. This was portrayed when in the film he goes to pick up a vehicle to use from a local mechanic. The mechanic, a black man, is surprised to see someone who shares the color of his skin dressed in a suit carrying a badge. But when he asks Tibbs where he's staying,
You got a roof? Find a motel.
Bo, we got company.
It's laughable to him that Tibbs would assume he could get a hotel room in Sparta, Mississippi. When two people are brought in to give testimony, the man wouldn't even let his sister speak as long as Detective Tibbs was in the room.
Well, I ain't talking about this with him in the room.
And director Norman Jewison even had subtle moments that today might slip past us, like when Detective Tibbs examines the dead body for clues at the morgue. Taking special care to show his black hands examining white skin was something that would make most people take pause back then. I also want to take a second and point out as well that cinematographer Haskell Wexler wanted to take special care with moments like these, and was the first to properly light a scene for a black actor, taking care not to overlight so Poitier's expressions were clear on camera. Wexler had previously shot Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and went on to shoot One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Lastly, I'll showcase the most notorious scene in the film, what I'm calling the slap heard round the world. Tibbs and Gillespie go to visit a local cotton farm owner, Mr. Endicott, and during a heated exchange, he slaps Tibbs, and well, I'll let you see for yourself how that played out.
Gillespie,
Yeah,
you saw it.
I saw it.
Well, what are you gonna do about it?
I don't know.
My favorite part of that scene wasn't just the slapback, it was the recoil and cowering by Endicott, the realization that his entitlement wouldn't carry him here in this moment. He was weak and feeble. He expected the law to be on his side. This was the era of lynching, after all. But he was left there alone with his useless racism and nothing else. With that slap, Poitier in some ways became the first black action hero, and paved the way for films like Shaft and Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song just a few years later. Jewison said that when he had the chance to watch the film with a black audience, they cheered at this moment. It was a changing of the tides. Also, real quick tidbit, this scene around the cotton field was the only one to be shot in the South. The rest of the film was shot in rural Illinois at Poitier's demand, as he wouldn't travel below the Mason-Dixon line for his own safety. He and his best pal Harry Belafonte were almost killed by the Klan in Mississippi when they were young. They went down to film this one scene in Tennessee, and sure as shit, they were denied lodging immediately, and an irate crowd showed up to start trouble. Jewison recalled, "I called my key grip and I said, get the biggest guys we got, the grips and the electricians, because I don't want anybody coming into Sidney's floor." Poitier told Jewison, "I got a gun under my pillow and I'm gonna blow away the first guy that comes through that door." These were the times. This is why this movie was and is important. This film is obviously a classic, and I'm shocked it took me this long to get to it. It was wonderfully shot, perfectly acted. I didn't even get to Steiger's gum-chomping Best Actor performance. But more than all that, it acts as a point in cinema history where you could definitely see a before and after effect, both in art and also culturally. It helped make a chapter break in our nation's history. I can't help but give this film all the stars for its willingness to risk it all for authenticity. Well, that's it for me. Catch me on the next episode of Esoterica Cinema. I'll leave you with the acceptance speech of Rod Steiger for his Best Actor award for his performance in this film.
And most importantly, I'd like to thank Mr. Sidney Poitier for the pleasure of his friendship, which gave me the knowledge and understanding of prejudice in order to enhance my performance. Thank you, and we shall overcome.